So today I have special guest Mallory Whitfield with me today. She is a creativity coach, motivational speaker, and author. And one of the reasons that I asked to interview her is because she is very inspiring and uplifting, and that is the message that she spreads online to her community. So I'm excited to have you here today.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to chat with you.
You. So I guess we'll just jump right in. Do you just want to give us a brief summary maybe of what you're doing right now since it's been a while since you've published a book, and I know that you're also founder of Badass Creatives as well.
Yeah. Yeah. The question of like, what do you do is always the hardest one. I think for everybody, but especially for me, because I have done so many things. I feel like I've lived a million lives in one, which I feel like is the best way to do it, right? If we only have this one life, you might as well live a million lives in that one go around. But yeah, I most recently, I've taken sort of a break this last year. I had some family stuff, helping my mom. We just moved in with her recently to help as a caregiver. So I've sort of taken a break from the online stuff, but actually have just started to post a few more things on YouTube again. Sort of coming back out of my hole, out of a pause. So I work full time by day in digital marketing as a customer education manager for a software company, sort of teaching about search engine optimization and marketing strategy and things like that. That's where I've paid the bills in large part for the last decade plus or so. But then I also love teaching in all forms and, like you said, sort of sharing the lessons that I've learned the very, very hard way in hopes that maybe somebody gains some tiny bit of wisdom and doesn't have to make all of the same mistakes that I've made. So I've done some of that through Badass Creatives, through my book, We Are the Weird Ones, Embrace Your Weird for a Kinder, More Inclusive World. And just in trying to be myself and express who I am in everyday interactions with people too. That's a lot of how I've been doing it this last year, is just when I'm with somebody, just trying to show up as myself as a model for the fact that we should all be leaning into our own authentic self and allowing space for other people to embrace their own authenticity, their own weird.
Yeah, that was so beautiful. Okay, thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
So we can go ahead and jump right into the first question. What led you to focus on the message that you now share with the world, like especially when it comes to inclusivity and telling people that they do need to embrace their authenticity?
So I've adopted this word weird and sort of reclaimed it as part of, titles of my book and things that I've shared online. Because I think growing up, I always felt weird. I was called weird numerous times in school. And sometimes that's in a like loving jab sort of way. And sometimes, depending on who it's coming from, is a little bit more sinister. But I think that we are all, weird in our own ways. Like the more that I've talked to people, the more that I've had conversations or just listened to other people sharing their truth and their stories, at some level, I think all of us struggle with that feeling of, in certain spaces or in certain parts of our life, feeling like the outsider or feeling like we don't quite belong or struggling to want to belong. And I think that's a very human experience. And I think that more people should be talking about that and sharing that, because the more that we realize that we do all have that in common, the more we actually can feel like we do belong, right?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I would say for me too, I spent a lot of my childhood just moving from one place to another. So I was always looking for that community or that group of people that I fit in. So I think it's just really challenging for people to, I guess, pretend, just be oblivious to it. In the end, doesn't serve them because they're not living through their authenticity.
Yeah. And that pretend, that's such a big piece of it too, right? We so often put on these masks or these personas in order to try to fit in with groups. And that often starts in childhood, especially as we go through like tweens and teenage years. That's very common, I think, for most people to sort of put on those masks to try to fit in and try to just like shift ourselves into somebody else's idea of what we should be. And we lose parts of ourselves along the way. And then I feel like so much of adulthood is about unlearning a lot of what we get conditioned to be or do as children, and then coming into our own self.
I agree. And I had this thought this morning that when we see someone that looks different or that is doing something different than us, and we automatically think that they're weird or different or any kind of like derogatory word, I think it does two things. Number one, we could be envious and we're projecting ourselves onto them. But number two, we're scared to be in that feeling of like uncertainty or unfamiliarity because we can't control what they're doing. And so it bothers us because we feel like we have to be in control, but change is just inevitable no matter if you're experiencing that through someone else or in your own life.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that feeling of envy, I think that is often like a common source of that. Even an example that pops to mind that seems so simple and innocuous, but I've pretty much throughout most of my life preferred having short hair. I have a lot of hair, and so I like to keep it short. It grows very fast, and I have headphones on right now, so you can't really see it too well. But I've had my head kind of in like a mohawk, sort of like most of my head is shaved most of the time. And I frequently, have people, especially women, say, "Oh my gosh, I love your hair, but I could never do that." Right? It's always this caveat of like, I would never be brave enough to have short hair or, partially shaved head or whatever, even though they are saying they like that. Right? And I also believe that some things you might admire in other people and know that that thing is for them and not for you, because I definitely do that too, right? Where it's like I respect somebody else's style and know like that's not my style, like I'm going to stay in my lane and they stay in theirs. But I've heard things like that, or even like with creativity. I've always been a very naturally creative and expressive person, grew up doing theater. I've always done like different art and crafts and things like that. And I used to do craft shows, sell handmade products at craft shows for years. And it was similar where people would come up as customers to my table and say, "Oh my gosh, you're so creative. I'm not creative." And I don't believe in that either. I think everybody is creative, but I think that we often have this idea that creativity equals art in like an artistic output, as if like you're going to be at a gallery or sell handmade stuff at a craft show and that equals creativity. Mm-hmm. And that's an aspect of creativity. But I think that we are all innately creative in our own ways. Right? Every time you solve a problem in your life, that's creativity. That's creative problem solving. Right? And I think, again, so much of life is, I think if we live it well, it's about reclaiming that power, that innate creativity, that joy that's inside of us. But that so often gets buried because of all of these external forces and these cultural conditionings that we all sort of live in, that's in the water, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I was listening to this podcast with Jay Shetty. Anything can be art. It's just a matter of perspective.
Yeah.
What inspired the Wheel of Framework?
I misspoke. I called the Wheel of Weird Wheel of Framework. If you're watching, here's a quick visual. And if you're listening, Mallory explains the Wheel of Weird in more detail.
Was it just growing up and feeling that you were an outcast? Because that's a really important part of the book.
Yeah. So in my book and in my keynote show, which sort of predated writing the book, I have this 4-part circle Wheel of Weird framework, right? And if you just imagine a circle cut into 4 quadrants, it's basically that. If you're listening and don't have the visual. And so it actually, when I first was creating the keynote show, sort of this like one-person show back in 2019, it originally started slightly differently. The last part was different originally. So the 4 parts are curiosity, compassion, authenticity, and then the last one is action. Although it actually started out when I did it the first few times, it was allyship. Right. So when I created the book and the show, my intention was to really talk about these ideas of, belonging and creating this, inclusive atmosphere for other people, but also this acceptance of self. Right. In acknowledging that we are sort of all misfits, we're all weird in our own way. And if we could just sort of love on ourselves, we could love on other people better too and create a gentler, kinder world for everybody. And a lot of those parts of the Wheel of Weird framework, the more I've really thought about them over the last few years since I created them originally, I really come to see them as like, these are part of my core values. I've done values exercises a number of times, and I try to revisit that because I do believe that some of our, if we were to have like 20 core values, a lot of that stuff shifts and changes, but sometimes we might use slightly different words, but it's often the same base like feeling when it comes to those core values. And I think that's it for me. Like, curiosity has always been one of my core values. I think it's that aspect of how I am like naturally creative. I'm naturally curious about the world. I've always loved learning. I've always loved seeking out information in so many ways. And I think that when we start from a mindset of curiosity, whether it's internal, whether it's starting to question those cultural conditioning that we were raised with, like what is it that our parents or teachers or people that we grew up in school with told us we should want, or we should, have our lives be. Is that really what I believe? Is that really what's right for me? Coming from that mindset for ourselves, but also coming from that curious mindset about other people too. Instead of meeting people from a judgy place of just saying like, oh, you're XYZ, and trying to put somebody else into a box based on a stereotype. Instead, really trying to approach listening to their own story and experience, right? And then compassion is another core value of mine. And it also goes both ways. So for me, the Wheel of Weird framework, these 4 things, it's both about the internal experience of how we treat ourselves as well as how we treat other people. So for compassion, I really did not treat myself in a self-compassionate way for a very, very long time. Probably until I was in my mid-30s and went through a really, really big breakup at the same time that I was going through a lot of like job and career shifts. At the same time, my dog that I'd had for more than a decade passed away. I found myself reading Kristin Neff's book, Self-Compassion, which is really fabulous. She's a researcher about this topic of self-compassion. And I realized like I was not being compassionate with myself and with the language I was using towards myself. I was talking to myself in ways that I would never talk to somebody else, for example. And what she's found in that research about self-compassion is that as we start to practice and develop self-compassion, as we start to be gentler to ourselves, it actually does impact other people. We also start to model that behavior in how we interact with other people as well, right? And so if we all as individuals could start with being softer with ourselves, it really could change the world, right? We really could make a nicer, kinder place for all of us. And so then the third part of the Wheel of Weird framework is authenticity. And same thing, inside and outside, both us and other people. It's about acknowledging all of those parts of ourselves that really is unique to us and special to us. What are the special gifts that we were put on this earth to, do and be and live and express in this lifetime? And then also acknowledging that authenticity and that uniqueness of other people, right? Not forcing them into those boxes, but really honoring them as who they, say that they authentically are, and allowing and enjoying and cherishing that authenticity of everybody else. And so then the fourth part, like I said, when I originally did the show, I called it allyship, because it was really about like, how do we show up for other people, right? How do we, be allies for other people who are different than us, who may not have the same types of strengths or privileges that we might have. But as I kept doing, speaking about these things and writing about the topic, I realized like, this word is not quite right. Because we've probably all heard that phrase, like performative allyship, where it's sort of like you say like, oh yes, I'm an ally to somebody else who's different than me. But like, what does that mean? Right? And at the root of what it actually takes to be an ally, even if it's just in a situation of, say you see somebody being bullied, or just, like in like an abusive situation. Say you're in like a grocery store and you see somebody who's like obviously in some sort of like abusive situation and somebody's like yelling at them or whatever, right? Like, what does that take to be an ally in that situation? It takes action. It takes stepping in to, a potentially like risky situation and like saying something, or like, putting your physical body in that space to like stop an altercation. And so that last part is about action. And so it's about taking action with ourselves, practicing whatever sort of like self-care or self-growth exercises that means for us. Maybe that's practicing boundaries. Maybe that's naming our needs. And same thing with taking that action to show up for other people as well, both people in our lives and, anybody in the greater world.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for breaking down each one individually and giving us, a full scope of that. Thank you. This is going to be a quote, and I'm just going to read it aloud. This also came from your book, We Are the Weird Ones. One reason that I asked this question is because I am from the South. I am from New Orleans, and I related to this quote a lot. So you wrote, if you look at movies in popular culture, people with Southern accents are often portrayed as stupid, backward, or racist. So maybe I unconsciously trained myself to have a more neutral way of speaking to distance myself from that. That idea really struck me because when we distance ourselves from our roots, we risk losing touch with who we are. So how has that tension between self-preservation and self-expression shaped your creative journey? And do you feel your art was ever impacted by that distance?
Yeah, so let me just shed a little bit more light on that quote and my own, experience with it. So I was born in New Orleans, but I grew up on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, which I just moved back here to South Mississippi recently. And then I lived in New Orleans basically from college until just a few months ago. So I basically got out of South Mississippi to the nearest big city as soon as I could, because I don't know if you've ever, I know you've been to New Orleans, but if any of the listeners have never been to New Orleans, like it's technically in the South, but it feels very different than a lot of the rest of the South, right? Yeah. But growing up in South Mississippi, I was exposed to a lot of those messages that we all are in popular culture about those stereotypes of what it means to be Southern. And I was also a theater kid growing up. And I remember even as a teenager when I was doing theater here in South Mississippi, having people ask me, where are you from? And I was like, I'm from here. Like, I'm from here. And there was something about, I guess I just didn't have as strong of a South Mississippi accent as some of my peers and other people, that they thought I'd moved here from somewhere else. Like, I don't know, I'd moved from California or something. I had not. And it happened so regularly that at some point later in life, maybe in my 20s, I started sort of reflecting on it and I was like, that's so weird. Like, why does everybody keep asking me this? This is so weird. And yet I did basically escape to the biggest large city nearby, New Orleans, as soon as I could. It feels like a little separate island in the middle of, Louisiana and Mississippi. It feels very different from every place around it. And I started to realize, I think it's like maybe I had subconsciously tried to distance myself from being Southern, right? From being anything remotely related to all of those negative stereotypes that I did not want to be associated with in the media. And yet over the last, say like decade or so, especially since this became really like conscious to me, I've started to reclaim and explore with curiosity what my relationship with this place is, because I've traveled. I've been, traveled internationally, traveled all over a lot of the United States. And part of it is that as I've traveled, I've seen that people are people around the world. Right? I was traveling in the Netherlands. This was 20 years ago almost, with my sister and some exchange student friends and their families. And I remember one of them saying something about, we were traveling in like a tourist spot and they saw some people with like bright orange hats and they're like, oh, those Dutch people. And like in this sort of like very judgy way of like, those people next door who aren't like us, who are different and therefore bad. There was this like tone about it, right? And I was like, this is just what people do everywhere, I think, is like we try to other people, and it's often the people who are, closest to us, who are sort of like easy pickings to make fun of or look down on. And I think so often that othering of other people is a way of trying to build ourselves up, but it's such a false, it's like, we don't have to build ourselves up by putting other people down, That's so often what we do, but that's not necessary. We can treat ourselves with self-compassion, and we can treat other people with compassion instead. But yeah, I really tried to start to re-embrace and explore the good parts of being Southern. One amazing resource that I discovered, they've been around a while. So there is a site and a magazine now called The Bitter Southerner. And they have a lot of great articles and writers, and they've started doing a print magazine, and they have a Bitter Southerner like store where they have t-shirts and flags and like all this stuff. And I love it because it's really about sort of that idea of like reclaiming the good parts of being Southern and acknowledging that not all of us are representative of that stereotype that has been perpetuated in media. Right? That there are lots of smart people, that there are lots of people who care about, progressive things or like inclusion or, just want to see a different world than what the South was in these last 100+ years, right? And so, yeah, just like I've really tried to embrace the good parts and also acknowledge what does need to be changed, because there's a lot, those stereotypes in part come from truth. There has been a lot of negative stuff here in the South over the last few hundred years, certainly. And yet also with traveling, like I've seen that that's not exclusive to the Southern, or to the South. I think if you live in the United States over the last, decade or so, you probably see that stuff is spread in pockets throughout our country and throughout the world. And it's not that just being from some place means that's who you are. You get to choose who you are, and you get to find the people who you resonate with no matter where you live.
I definitely agree with that, especially the aspect that we are going to find differences or judge people, whether that's intentionally or unintentionally, whether it's state to state or internationally. And it just takes a lot of self-awareness to realize that we are enough. What's one thing you wish someone had told you before stepping into your role as a creative professional and thought leader? I know that's kind of broad, but
yeah. I don't even know if I wouldn't label myself as a thought leader. Okay. Maybe there's something there, right? Because I will say that when I was probably like, in my 20s and in younger days, I think I probably did aspire to be a thought leader on some level, right? And even if other people might assign that title to me, that's fine. But I think that to aspire to a title like that, it's sort of like aspiring to the title of like guru, right? Okay. Like if somebody else was gonna, like think about like the traditional like yogic guru or something. It's fine if this wise sage, some students are like, guru. But like, would you really trust a guru that just takes the title of guru, right? There's something there, right? Like wisdom is earned through experience and through trial and error. And I think that's it. It's like you can't rush things. You can't skip the journey. You can't skip the hard parts. I was listening to a song this morning during my yoga practice. Trevor Hall, You Can't Rush Your Healing is the name of the song. And it's true, right? Whether it's healing from a breakup or grief or loss, or just trying to rush the struggle and the experience and the knowledge that you gain through the stages of life, you just have to keep walking down the path. You can't like zip up the mountain overnight. I mean, now let's be real, like you could take a helicopter to the top of Mount Everest, but does that really give you the experience of climbing the mountain in the same way that you would if you were taking one step at the time up the trail? You would miss all of the things that you would see and learn and experience along the way, right? With the mountain journey metaphor, right? Like the beauty is in the hike. The beauty is in listening to the birds, listening to all of the sounds, hearing the crunch of the leaves beneath your feet. And life is like that walk up the mountain. There's some parts that really suck. There's some parts that are really hard, but looking back, that's the stuff that gives life meaning.
I think that was a really great answer. Yeah, I was not expecting that one, so I really love that. It's so true, though. It is.
Yeah, yeah.
Obviously, you've dabbled in many different areas when it comes to creativity. So, how do you manage multiple creative projects without getting overwhelmed?
This, again, you're assuming that I don't get overwhelmed, and I have definitely gotten overwhelmed.
Yeah.
I think in these last few years, again, as I sort of am able to tune in to myself and my inner authority more and more, and I'm still not always perfect, right? I still often struggle with deferring too much of my power to other people and other people's ideas and other people's thoughts. Like, I'm curious, I'm this constant learner, and sometimes I'll listen to too many podcasts or read too many thought leadership think pieces, right? Which is all full of good information, right? That's not a knock on anything in the self-development space, or, like, we should learn from other people, and we get to release what doesn't serve us or what doesn't serve us anymore.
Right.
And I think, like managing multiple projects or products, I'm built in such a way that, like, I really can and want to juggle a lot of things at the same time. Not everybody's built that way, right? Some people really do work better if they can sort of just like focus on one thing. And some people, even growing up, they're like, I want to be XYZ thing when they grow up. And that's their sole focus. And they move towards that and they grow and they do that. And that's how they're built. And sometimes I've envied those types of people because I am so all over the place, right? I've definitely had those moments of feeling overwhelmed, of feeling burnt out, and wishing I could be like those people who always knew what they wanted, and it was just that one thing, and they were just going to go down that one path their entire life, because it feels easier from the outside looking in. I'm sure they would, counter my argument about their own journey and how that feels for them. But the juggling of the multiple projects, and again, I still have to practice this and keep check on this, is like checking in and being willing to release what I'm not interested in anymore, what's not right for me anymore. Back when I was writing my keynote in my book, when I was working with some writing coaches, one of them used this phrase. I'm not sure who it's attributed to originally. I think it's one of these like common writing phrases, but they were like, kill your darlings. So when you write the first draft of anything, whether it's like a full on-stage performance or a book, it's usually going to be crap. It's usually going to be full of just you got to just get it out. There's the term shitty first draft is very common in writing spaces for a reason. You just got to get it out. And then you're going to have probably like a lot of stuff, and you have to kill those darlings. You have to take, those ideas that are like, okay, this is really cool, but ideas are plentiful. And I remember hearing, what is not meant for me, if it is meant for me, it's going to come back to me, even if I release it. I used to hold on to ideas, almost like hoard them. Like I would have all sorts of note taker apps and documents like virtually and on written paper. And I try to every so often just go through and really like with my gut check in and say like, okay, do I need this? Like, does this still feel right? Does this still spark joy? Is this something I'm still excited about? Or is this something that Mallory of 6 months ago or 2 years ago or 5 years ago was excited about, but it no longer serves me? And just delete it, erase it, let it go, and know that if that thing is supposed to be for me, it will come back to me. Maybe it'll come back to me in another format, but yeah, that's part of how I've tried to manage the overwhelm of multiple projects, is just sort of like trying to release some of that control.
Mm-hmm. I definitely agree what you said earlier about the self-development realm, and what you just said, you just have to release it. One of the things for me is I listen to a lot of podcasts, a lot of motivational speakers, and for me, I don't know them personally, so I just feel like they're superheroes. I never see them hang out with their friends. I never see them do anything that is fun. It's always work. So I feel like if I'm not living up to their maybe like fulfillment of work, then I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. But I know that's not true. It's a journey. It's just different steps.
Yeah. Well, I was talking with my therapist this morning. Think about, do the deathbed experiment, literally. Just this last week, we had a close family friend pass away very suddenly, a heart attack.
Wow.
And, those things, they just remind, like, life is precious and short and you don't know. And sometimes, things happen very suddenly. But like, if you imagine living to the ripe old age of 101, what are you going to regret? And what are you going to remember? Are you going to remember like closing the deal or like the time you spent in front of your computer? Are you going to be like, oh gosh, that was such an amazing part of my life? No, you're going to remember, the experiences that you had with your loved ones. You're going to remember the joy and the happiness and the fun times. So chase joy. Mm-hmm. Choose life, right? Like if you have the, access to any of those things, even in small moments, even if it's taking that walk outside or playing with your pets or whatever it is, like choose those moments because that's what makes life worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I agree. When it comes to your work, do you feel more drawn to like solo work, or do you feel like maybe the best of your ideas come when you're collaborating with other artists?
Yeah, I definitely like both.
Yeah.
I feel like I, in so many ways, sort of have these like two sides to my personality. And that's definitely part of who I am. And so I do really enjoy having solo time to think and be introspective and process things and journal and write and, create things on my own. Mm-hmm. And if I spend too much time in that solo place, I don't have anything to respond to. Yeah. Right. So, again, this is me, but like I need other stuff to riff on, other people to respond to, other things to come into my periphery to like have those ideas and sparks and like kind of, send the ball flying down in the next direction. Sort of like a pinball machine. Like I need something to kind of like shift me if I'm stuck. And so I really like both.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I really resonate with that idea. Like you have this information and then you want to like bounce it off other people. I feel like for me, I like to read a lot. I just finished this book and it's called Hurricane Summer, and I have all of this information and like now I'm like, okay, well, I have to tell people. I can't just like keep it in my head, because there's a lot in there that I just feel like people need to know, and it's just something that I want to spread awareness to. So that's interesting. Yeah. You talk openly about your growth in spirituality, which is rare and refreshing. So why is that transparency important to you, and what's helped you to stay grounded while doing it?
I mean, I think transparency is sort of another side of that authenticity element, right? And vulnerability without sort of dumping everything, especially when we're talking about sharing things online or sharing things like with the wider world versus sharing things with people who are close to us, who know us on a personal level. But for me specifically, the sort of developing relationship with spirituality and those elements is something that Mallory of 10 years ago would not believe the Mallory of now, right? Because that's not like a thing that has always been a part of me. And yet, even as I say that, there probably was a part of me as a small child that had it. And then conditioning from other people around me, I sort of lost a lot of that along the way. And I've sort of, over the last maybe like 7 years or so, started to slowly reclaim some of it. And it's like the more that I open myself up to those things that I was so closed off to before, the more me I feel. But yeah, like, and spirituality, I mean, it includes a lot of things, right? Like, so for instance, a decade ago, literally, I remember 2015 being at a conference, and my business coach at the time was there speaking on business topics, but she was also a certified yoga instructor. And so she was teaching morning yoga classes at this conference, right? And I remember her inviting me to the 7 a.m. yoga class. And I was like, no, that sounds awful. I don't do yoga. That sounds like boring and slow and like the worst. Like that sounds like literally the worst. I will not. I'll come to your business conference part thing instead. And then, so maybe like a few years after that, I, work at my desk all day. I'm on the computer all the time. I was starting to sort of have like neck back issues. I was like, I gotta do something. I was like, okay, maybe I'll just try a few little like morning yoga stretches when I get up, do some like yoga with Adriene on YouTube, that sort of thing. And as I started to do that, I was like, this actually does feel really good. And then I realized it started to mentally make me feel better, not just physically. I started it for the physical aspect, but it really helped me get through that period of my life where I was going through a breakup and job transitions and all these other things. It was one of the things that really started to ground me. And now, over these last few years, it's really become like a daily practice. I have a habit tracker app that I use called Strides, where first I was just like, let me do a 30-day, just a little bit of yoga every day for 30 days. Maybe it's 5 minutes, maybe it's 10 minutes. That's all it has to be. And I did it for 30 days and then I kept going. And now I'm at 1,000 something. It's way past 1,000 now. And I'm finishing the end of a 200-hour yoga teacher training this later this month, which again, Mallory of 10 years ago would not have believed you. And here we are.
Wow. Well, congratulations regarding your teacher training. Yeah, that's amazing.
But I guess just to say, like, don't close yourself off to what future you might want, because future you is allowed to grow and change.
You've had varied roles as a multi-passionate creative. Have you experienced fulfillment or lack thereof in the workplace?
Yeah, I pretty much have an existential crisis about work and personal meaning every few years, if we're being really honest. And I think, part of that is the fact that I am this very multi-passionate person who really does want to do multiple things with my time. And so I think that's part of it, is that I really crave different elements in my life, diversity of like how I spend my time. And so when I've been in, say, like very corporate job environments, like a few years ago, I was in a situation where I never would purposely apply for a super corporate job, but I was in a situation where I was working for a company, had gotten that job because it was somebody I already knew from a previous job. And then about a year in, we got bought out by a corporation. And so it became a very corporate environment. And I realized this is not for me. It was far too like structured and bureaucracy, and didn't really allow the space for creativity, but both for me and other people, like in my department. I don't think I was the only one feeling that way. Really needing to lean into that expressiveness and that diversity of like time and choice, but also wanting to contribute something, right? I think that's part of that existential crisis that I periodically go through. And I think part of that is like, again, cultural conditioning. There are so many people who get these like New York Times bestsellers, or they're on the Oprah show and they're talking about like, just find your passion and everything will be great. And it's like, well, what if I don't have one passion? What if my passion 10 years ago is not my passion anymore? And what if I'm not sure my passion next time is, right? And this is one of the things that I still struggle with. Even I've been struggling recently, quite honestly, with a lot of these feelings around work and purpose. And, do I want to shift things with my own businesses or things like that, right? And each of us get to choose, and each of us get to listen to what's right for us. I think that, especially as everything in the world continues to change and shift so fast, there's so much that's like so far out of our control. But we get to choose how we show up day to day, even if it's like, you're in a work situation, and even if it's just like, okay, well, I'm gonna, at my lunch break, go outside for lunch, or choose how I spend my breaks, or choose how I spend, the time before work, or choose how I spend my commute, right? Like finding that that place to reclaim our own like little bit of purpose and our own little bit of choice.
Yeah, I definitely agree, because like a couple of years ago, I was at a corporate job and I was in a sales position, and I felt like it was very structured. I wasn't happy, and I was like, there's got to be some creative element that I could either do in this role or pivot to. I always felt like the role that I was in, I had to be inspiring someone or teaching them, or what I had to do, it had to be meaningful to me. I don't know if that's a privileged thought to have because I'm not just working to pay my bills, and I know that is some people's experience. So I've tried to look at it from all different angles. But like now the job that I have, I'm able to spread meaning and compassion because I look at it differently because I'm able to network with people, and it is technically corporate, but it's not as structured. So yeah, I think it just depends.
Yeah, and I think, what you said about acknowledging that you had a certain privilege in that situation, right? And that not everybody's job situation is the same, right? Some people are working 3 minimum wage job and taking care of kids and doing all of the things. But I think when we do have a level of privilege in any part of our life, with that comes responsibility, right? And part of that responsibility is like showing up to honor who we are and modeling that for both ourselves and anybody else, in our lives. And it sounds like you were trying to model that for the people that you were directly working with, right? Because every way that we show up, whether it's negatively or positively, does create a ripple effect. It's like what we were talking about with the self-compassion thing. Like there's science where like that how we treat other people does create that ripple effect.
In the past few years, AI has really become just in every conversation, I feel like. So what are your thoughts when it comes to AI and creativity? Like, what is your relationship with AI? And do you believe it enhances or hinders our creativity?
Yeah. So it's funny. I was literally last week at my day job. We had sort of a lunch and learn thing where a few of us were asked to present about AI. And I was asked to present because our company is really trying to integrate AI into a lot of what we do. It's sort of a directive we've been given. And going into that, I have a very mixed feeling about generative AI and large language models and all of this stuff. And some of it is the creativity concerns that I've heard a lot of other creatives express, and everybody's allowed to have their own opinions and relationships and boundaries with AI, certainly, right? Because so often these large language models and chatbots and everything have been trained on material that was not theirs to use, right? Whether it's like they were training on copyrighted, written material or art. I definitely am not like a fan of the generative like visual images that were often trained on, like artists were not compensated for some of the training material and stuff. And one of the other things that I really struggle with and that I'm very concerned about is the environmental impact of AI. It takes a huge amount of energy and water and natural resources to power all of these things. And we're just leaning more and more into that. I was reading an article recently about if you consider yourself an environmentalist, like you shouldn't really be using AI. I'm in these situations where like, I'm being told and asked to use AI for work. And I have found situations where I found it to be really helpful in certain aspects of my own personal life. I was just earlier this week using Claude, which is, similar to ChatGPT. It's a model. Using it really as a sounding board.
One more quick interruption. At this point in the episode, I lost power, so we had to hop on the call once more. And you'll notice if you're watching that the camera quality has drastically changed. So I do apologize about that, but let's go on.
Having it ask me questions to really like reflect on, gut check for myself as I'm trying to think through something, right? Because even though I highly recommend human therapy, right? I'm not in favor of using ChatGPT or any of these things to replace therapy. I feel like that is a very dangerous road. It is not a person, even though they might sound like they're people. And I think they can be helpful tools to, chat through things in a neutral way and just like sort of give us prompts for that introspection, give us prompts for really like checking in with ourselves, maybe framing questions in a way that another person might not. Because what all of these things are that we call AI now, it is learning and getting smarter now, but basically they're large language models. So really what they do is like they take, language and sort of piece things together to spit back based on a calculation, like what language they know that people have used. And so they're really good at like asking us questions and responding. So I was having a whole conversation trying to figure out, what I want to do with my career and my life and all of these existential crises that we were talking about earlier. And it was very, very helpful. It kind of helped me get to the root of my issue as I sort of thought through these questions that I was having it prompt me with. So I do have a very mixed relationship with it. I do think it's like any new technology. We have to be aware of the risks and the rewards and choose for ourselves what our relationship now is and keep checking in. I think it's very similar to like social media, right? I've worked in digital marketing full time the last like 10, 15 years, and I've seen all these different social media platforms like come and go and grow and evolve. And Instagram is very different than it was a decade ago. Facebook is very different than it was a decade ago, all this stuff, right? And I have a very different relationship with it. A decade ago, I was using Instagram when it was only the square photos in a very different way. And now I still have my accounts. I haven't deleted them, but I'm very, very rarely on them because I've seen the studies, I've seen the stories about how Silicon Valley tech executives won't let their kids use social media tools, right? It reminds me a lot of the cigarette executives in the 1970s. Like they knew what they were doing. They wouldn't let their own family do it, but they're still going to sell it. And so, I've just tried to reclaim my relationship for myself. I know you talked about reading. I've tried to like been reading actual paperback and hard copy books as an alternative to scrolling on social media. But we all get to choose for ourselves what that relationship is. I think it's important to just like be aware of all of the elements to it and all of the ramifications and bring mindfulness to it.
I think mindfulness is definitely necessary, formulating your own relationship with it. For me, one of the things that I use it to do, I guess, essentially is help me create scripts for different videos that I do on social media. But in the end, after all this research that I've done, I want to put it in a way that people can understand it rather than just me saying a whole bunch of words that might not mesh together. And so I ultimately feel like I'm not doing the work, and there is no reward. So that's my relationship with AI, and I'm trying to use it less, but use it in a way that makes sense for me, essentially.
Yeah, like I'm not a big fan of like turning all of your brain power over to it. Like it's
Yeah.
very tempting to take it as the easy route to just be like, oh, just have it do the work. But
Yeah.
I've been, like have it write a blog post, for example. Well, you can tell when a ChatGPT or any of them have fully written a blog post, right?
Yeah.
Versus there are people who can use it to help them assist and write a blog post much better, and you would never know because there's enough of the human element and knowledge and skill in there blended. But if you're fully turning over your expertise to that, it's not going to be pretty, in my opinion.
Right. No, 100%. I agree. Are you familiar with Ryan Holiday at all?
I've heard the name.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he's known for his stoicism beliefs and outlook, but he's also an author. So he has this expose that he wrote a few years ago, and it's called Trust Me, I'm Lying. And in the book, he asks, what would the world look like if more people behaved like you? How would you answer that?
Oh, me win. What time of day? What point of my life, right? I I mean, the way that I have been trying to show up and behave more recently has been trying to bring that mindfulness to things, trying to listen to my own inner authority, trying to be introspective and reflective, but also be clear and communicative with other people, right? Trying to name my needs and have boundaries with other people in other situations. And that can be difficult, but I think it's rewarding. And I think if we were to apply those elements to everybody's behavior, I do think that that would be a radically different world than we have now.
Yeah.
Whether that's better or not, I mean, I would like to think that that would be somewhat
Mhm.
better and shift us
I think
into a
so.
new paradigm.
Yes. Yes.
But it's hard. It's hard.
It
And,
is.
not everybody wants to try the hard things, even as rewarding as they might be.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Talking with Mallory reminded me how powerful it is to show up as ourselves. I hope her words inspire you to learn a little deeper into your own truth. If you want to follow her journey, you can find her on Instagram at mallory.whitfield or Badass Creatives and YouTube at Mallory Whitfield or Badass Creatives. Thanks for listening, you guys, and I'll see you next time.